Gramsci's The Modern Prince. So, why does Gramsci choose Machiavelli's The Prince? Gramsci describes The Prince as a live work, which means that it has specific time and context, and also has a political objective. And it's a progressive piece of the time. And Machiavelli did not resort to long treatises or utopian ideals, but instead gives concrete actions of what is to be done for that time, space, specific time period in Italy. Machiavelli uses the mythical prince to arouse the subconscious elements of the masses, the people who are not in the know. A subaltern group, persons who are socially, economically, and geographically outside of the hegemonic power structure. The prince is a cry for passionate urgency. The people are under certain hegemonic interests, and the prince hopes for the people to realize their own interests in this. So Gramsci seizes on the prince and reclaims it for the use of the revolutionary socialists of his time period, and I would argue maybe ours as well. So Gramsci is not interested in the moralistic interpretations of Machiavelli, as in Machiavelli's bad person or very amoral or immoral. Whether the prince is moral or not, it matters not in the least. We are given specific conditions that we must work under, and it's often immoral. But the point is liberation, or instead of taking the high road, just for moralistic ambitions. Machiavelli is not merely a political scientist, he's a partisan, a man of powerful passions, an active politician who wishes to create a new balance of forces and therefore cannot help but concern himself on what ought to be, but not in a moralistic sense, of course. The active politician is a creator, initiator, but he neither creates from nothing, nor does he move in a turbid void of his desires and dreams. He bases himself in effective reality, a relation of forces in continuous motion and shift of equilibrium. So a reality is a relation of forces that are constantly moving. So Machiavelli and Marx, what do they have in common? Why did Machiavelli even write this book? Machiavellism has always been practiced, but has been scorned publicly. But they've always been practiced by the dominant groups. They know this. They've passed it down from generation to generation of things to do to keep in power. But so because the fact is that the ruling classes know things to do and what not to do, how to take power, how to keep power, then Gramsci says that then the prince must be for the subaltern groups, people who are not in the know, to bring them into the know. So Marxism is in a similar position to develop a theory and technique that will be useful for the revolutionary class. Like Machiavelli, the Marxists did not create the struggle that society finds itself. We're merely stating the facts of the struggle and to give rules and methodology in accordance with the objective conditions. We're also interested in the positive education positive education to arming the people who are, not physically arming, but arming them in the methodology and tactics, strategy, whatever, of people who are not in the know, people who are oppressed, namely the proletariat in this case. So a book or an individual cannot change reality, but only interpret it and to indicate the possible line of action, how historical forces ought to have acted. But in today's context, or actually when Gramsci was writing, so in the 20s and 30s, the prince cannot be a man, but only a party, specifically for the working class. So a party for the working class. So in Machiavelli's book, so Machiavelli sets out these things like principles to go by to take power, and at the end he merges with the people. Just as the party should be synonymous with the people it represents, the class that it represents, namely the working class, because you can have parties of many different classes, because there are many classes. So, but before we can even go into the political party, we must talk about what is politics. Politics is a central human activity, that means by which a single consciousness is brought into contact with social and natural world in all its forms. The base of the structure is the economic structure, and the superstructure is politics. So capitalism is the trust structure in this case, and superstructure is sort of like, you could say, like civil society or however you want to describe it, but it's all politics. There's distinctions within politics. But it's interesting though, because one must pay attention to this part though. The politics is born on economic terrain, but it also transcends it. It becomes distinct from it, has its own life and drama, but at the same time identifies with economics. So it is part of it and distinct from it. And this is a constant theme in Gramsci's writing, which is being part of something and distinct from something. So politics, because of this, because it is distinct from the structure, superstructure, must be treated as an autonomous science and be treated with the same kind of rigor as you would describe to economics. So, an example would be like understanding some, like identities like race, sex, or gender, like being queer, or sexual orientation in general. That this is all part of politics and must be worked out in the superstructure before we can even like talk about the base, the structure that gave it form. So not only is it born out of the base, the economic structure, but at the same time has its own life that we must also deal with. Because it often it manifests very differently, not always in the most economic ways. You know, sometimes it's against people's economic interests, but they're still racist, things like that. You know, so we must treat it as its distinct form and take it seriously. To go back to the political arts, now that we understand what is politics as an autonomous science, we must go back to the political party. So, the modern prince in today's time is the party representing the working class in this case, because this is meant for the working class, because though these ideas can be used for the ruling class, this is specifically written for the working class. The party should be synonymous with class, but at the same time party is informing the class, and the class is informing the party. And while this is happening, it's also part of a larger nexus of other parties and other historical forces, so we must look at it in a very dimensional way and not reduce it. So Gramsci then talks about what's in a party, like when is historically necessary, what to do in non-revolutionary time periods. But he also talks about how there are three conditions for party's existence. One, the mass element, the ordinary membership. Two is the principal cohesive element, which is the leadership, the developed leadership. And three is the intermediate between the first element and the second element. So there's the people, and then there's the leadership, and there must be, some would say, bureaucracy to make sure these two are communicating with each other effectively and are accountable to each other. So it's very important to note the second element, which is the leadership, has to be present for anything to function. It could be fragmented and unstable, like I would say today's. We don't really have, well, we have some so-called parties, but leadership is fragmented and unstable. But if you have all three elements in a healthy way, that is very difficult to destroy. And so then he also talks about the activity of leadership, like what are the duties, and one is like what it does, and second is like what provisions it makes for eventuality of its destruction, because the fact that destruction or the loss of the battle and the struggle is imminent, it's important to perpetually be developing new leaders. And things to guard against, and describes many different ways of things that can go wrong with the leadership, and the follies and the pitfalls of not only the leadership but the party itself, and it's incredibly painstakingly detailed. But I think what's more important than going over all these details of how a party should act, or how socialists or revolutionary socialists should behave and think about, is what Gramsci did by going back to the modern prince, and going to the prince and reclaiming it as the modern prince, is the fact that, so he's writing in Italy, which is for the Italian people, though again we can use more Gramsci today, and why we should use that today. It's the fact that he uses a very popular figure in Italy, which is Machiavelli, who has been interpreted in many different ways, and this is one interpretation. So a popular figure in people's imagination that they can connect with, he takes that, reclaims it, and puts a very radical narrative to it, which is really important, I think, to be able to appeal to a larger audience and really concretize a lot of the Marxist ideas and methods and methodology in general. So I think for today's leftists, it's important to think about looking at specific issues that we're in and where we're at to do something similar, you know, to use a popular figure and give it a new twist and really kind of use the things that we want to say, like all the things we want to communicate but we're unable to by using just Marxist language, but give it human qualities, because that's what the prince is. You know, the prince has these human qualities of what to do. And I think that's really important for the time being to do something similar to that. I'm not sure what that would look like. But I was just like also reading like Alan Badiou's reclaiming of St. Paul. You know, again, a very kind of popular figure, a saint, you know, and especially well in other religions, maybe not so much in the Protestant. But it's written for, you know, he's French, so French people would identify with that. And reclaiming his more radical person and the things that he did, going back and reconstituting his whole message and making it more understandable to regular people. So I don't know, that's something that I think the leftists should consider. And so this is like one take on that, which Gramsci's Modern Prince is. And I would love to see maybe more like that in the future. Make it part of an organic, so sort of like a trend, like a continuation of the organic intellectual history of a people.